We begin this evening with two Republican members of Congress. Representing Georgia's 1st District, Congressman Buddy Carter is serving his 3rd term in the House. He is a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Congressional Problem Solvers Caucus, and the Select Committee on Climate Change. And representing Utah's 3rd District, Congressman John Curtis has served in the House since 2017. He is a member of the Natural Resources and Foreign Affairs Committees in the House. Congressman Curtis also represents the youngest district in the country, where the average age is just 26 years old. So this conversation then is more than just academic for Congressman Curtis. It's one of political survival. Joining them on stage is my colleague, The Hill's editor-at-large and always young at heart, Steve Clements.
Young at heart.
The floor is yours.
Good to be with all of you guys. Good to see you, everyone. It is always fun to sort of talk about this and to sort of talk about politics and policy with people. Many of these people, not everyone, but many are from AU. Many are really interested in how our system is functioning and why it's functioning this way. So I'm going to throw a curveball at you at the beginning and just find out, to what degree is this kind of topic worthwhile? In the sense that, how many of you can rap the beginning of Hamilton? Some of you can, right? Yeah, be bold. You can do it. I mean, so I was amazed by this, that you go meet young kids, young people, young students, and they have an unbelievable ability to rap the beginning of Hamilton, which means they paid attention to what Ron Chernow said on there. I don't know if you guys have seen Hamilton.
Absolutely.
But when you go see Hamilton, you realize politics, even way back then, is not a kumbaya sport. That you set up different branches of government to fight vigorously for what they thought. You elect people who fought vigorously for what they wanted. You saw that in the tension between Hamilton and Jefferson and Adams and Madison. And so when we have forums that sometimes talk about reaching across the aisle, what does pragmatism look like, I sometimes think back to Hamilton and say, maybe it is all supposed to be a big fist fight. So how would you, John, frame it?
Well, first of all, I get asked all the time questions like, it's never been so bad, what are you going to do? And I love to respond and say, oh, really? Do you remember
Go see Hamilton?
With Civil War.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Civil War.
Right? Watergate, right? I mean, the country's been in some really bad places. And I think one of the things I try to emphasize is that this is what was designed, and the system is self-healing. Meaning all of these bad patches, Civil War, Hamilton, we worked ourselves out of and found ourselves in a better place than we were before we started. And I think that's too often lost.
Buddy, how do you deal with it? I mean, you're a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, as I understand it, and we're going to have Debbie Dingell up here in a moment, who is too. Is that the right place to be, or is it better to be basically maybe in one of the extremes of either of the parties right now?
I think what we have to do is remember why we're up here, and who sent us up here, what they sent us up here for, and it was to get things done. And I hear this all the time from people, oh, I've never seen it so bad. I go to church, wherever I'm at, my friends tell me, oh, and then I think back, well, you don't remember the 60s? You don't remember Kent State? You don't remember everything that went on during that time? I mean, you telling me it's never been this bad, the Vietnam War? Sure, it's been this bad. It's always been this bad, but I think it speaks of our democracy that, we've always bounced back, and we've always, what was it Winston Churchill said, of all, America eventually gets it right, and democracy is the worst form of government ever known to man, except for all the others that were tried from time to time. But, if I can just interject real quickly, there's a big problem here, and I explained it to my staff earlier today, and that's about the music. You mentioned Hamilton. The problem with you guys, this younger generation, is that I'm a child of the 70s, so I'm a child of music. No, seriously. Now, it was all about lyrics back then. So today I started off with, we did a tribute to 9/11. I started off with, in our lives there are people and places we remember. Anybody know where that came from? Ah, good, very good. The Beatles, John Lennon, Paul McCartney. Yeah. There are places we remember, and so it's all about the music, guys. That's what it's about.
All it is. So I want to just sort of do something because it's interesting. We have a very bright audience. I really enjoyed talking to many of you during the reception, but I think sometimes we presume memory when memory may not be there. You just talked very casually about Vietnam. I remember Vietnam, but I was basically 6 or 7 years old at that time, 8 years old, and my father was in the military at that time, so I remember elements of that being part of my life. But for this generation, talking about Vietnam is like what was talking about World War II was to me. In other words, it's a bit far. We talk about 9/11. I mean, how many of you actually remember 9/11? Oh, so, well, many of you are older than I thought. You know, so you're wearing your age well. No, but I mean, the point about memory of 9/11, which happened 18 years ago, is that we're still in America's longest war in Afghanistan, is that a lot of people don't have a robust memory of even that time. And I'm interested in to what degree that's something, as you guys go and meet voters, both intergenerationally, but both youthful voters that are getting engaged in this, is that memory challenge one that you've got to work with them? John?
Let me tell you what the biggest challenge is that the information you are getting is not like our daily lives. You hear all the bad, right? And I can give you a couple real quick examples. There were 73 of us over in Israel 2 weeks ago, Republicans and Democrats getting along. What was in the news? One Democrat, right? Because it was a bad experience and that made news. Nobody's talking about the 73 that are over there getting along. And we see things every day, Republicans and Democrats getting along, working together, passing bills. No bill goes into law right now that's not bipartisan, right? But you don't hear about those bills. 70% of what we pass goes through under what's called suspension, which means it has to have 2/3 majority of vote to pass, 70%. And you don't hear about those. And so for me, the biggest paradigm shift I try to make when I'm talking to people is to say, let me first tell you what I'm experiencing, and then we're going to try to merge that with what you're hearing.
So, John, we were just talking out there, and I had been reading about you having the youngest district in the United States that you represent, and that you think a lot about youth, you think a lot about millennials, and I made the offhanded comment that you seem like a wannabe millennial, and you said no.
I was very offended by that.
Yeah, you were very offended.
So I'm not like
tell
these
them what
two.
you said.
I am a millennial.
There you
right?
go.
I am not like these two.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, millennial is a state of mind. It's
Right.
not an age. I have kids. Yeah, you
That's
like that? Yeah. Ooh,
That's
let's
called
pause
a
on
tweetable
that.
moment, or
Yeah.
maybe an Instagrammable
Because
moment.
I
Yeah.
have kids that are
Yeah.
millennial age, and they are not
So
millennial.
what does that mean? I mean, when I'm very interested in what, you know, this room, we're going to get to questions and have them talk, but as you see it and as you're channeling this state of mind, what are the issues, top of mind, up at night issues that you find your citizens clamoring for?
Well, I'm going to go back to what Buddy said. They want us to get things done. They're really frustrated that we're not getting things done. So immigration, climate, I mean, you can go down the list of things that are important to us millennials.
You made a big statement on climate change the other day.
Yeah, and I'm shocked people, right? I'm a Republican. I actually said, okay, you guys ready for this? The climate's changing, and man's had an influence on it. And it was like, right? It was a big
Are
deal.
you still
Made
able to get into the White House?
Yeah, made the papers, right, and things like that. And you know, I think that unless we get into the heads of people who are thinking about these issues and show them that we can make progress on it, they're going to get discouraged. And what I'm seeing in Utah is actually the opposite, I think, of what's happening here, is they disengage, right? And so you all are engaging, and many of the millennials in my district, that's probably my biggest problem, is they're disengaging.
Yeah. Congressman, you also work on climate change quite a bit.
Yes.
What is the circular overlap with the Democrats you're working with on what is doable on sustainability policy today?
Well, first of all, I serve on the select committee for climate change, and I advocated to be on that committee. I wanted to be on it. I have the honor and privilege of representing the entire coast of Georgia, over 100 miles of pristine coastline, and that's my home. It's where I've lived all my life, where I intend to live the rest of my life. I believe in climate change.
Which
I believe
has
the
been
climate change.
hurt by Dorian.
Yes. We just escaped the storm. We just had a ship turn over in Brunswick Harbor, but yeah, we've been making the news here recently. But you know, I do believe in climate change. I believe the climate's been changing since day one. I'm old enough to remember back in the early 70s when we thought we were headed for another ice age. So the climate is changing, and the reason that I wanted to be on this committee and the reason that I advocated to be on this committee is because I want to bring reasonable, rational, common sense ideas to what we need to do, and there are there. You have the pie in the sky Green New Deal. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's only 14 pages. It's the most hilarious thing you will ever read. I mean, seriously, it really is. And I don't say that to say that I don't believe and I'm trying to be agnostic or something about climate change, because I'm not. But at the same time, you know, there are three things we have to do. We have to have mitigation, adaptation, and innovation in order to deal with this. I give the examples all the time. I represent the low country, the coastal area. If you build a house on a slab next to the marsh, guess what? It's going to flood. We got to adapt to the rising sea levels. We've got a road out to one of our barrier islands that right now we're planning to rebuild. About 5 or 6 times a year, it floods, not because of rain, but because of high tides. We got to build it up. We got to adapt. We got to mitigate the change. And yes, we've got to have innovation. We've got to innovate and have clean and renewable energy. I agree. I agree with John. I think that man has had an impact on it. To what degree, we may not all agree on, but we have had an impact on it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm excited. One of the reasons I'm excited is because I'm convinced that the greatest innovators, the greatest scientists in the world are right here in the United States of America. This is a tremendous opportunity for us.
Let me ask you both for a minute. One of the areas that's been dicey and has been a fragile part of our politics are issues about race, about where you're from, about gender, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. And there's a sense that some have that this White House, the president, your party, is not a big enthusiast for healing and bridging between those differences, but rather dividing. And I'd like to get your take as members of an equal branch of government about what your responsibilities are to bridge those differences as opposed to, I guess, aggravate them, to say it lightly. John?
Well, I do a lot of town hall meetings. I'm somewhere over
You've done a ton of them.
150
Yeah.
in 2 years. And this is one of the biggest topics that comes up. And I say some things that are sometimes not well received. And I'm gonna share it with you knowing it's probably not gonna be well received. And that is this, that elected leaders are more a reflection of us than we like to admit. And so if you don't like the president, if you don't like his behavior, one of the things I challenge people to think about is America really more like that than you're willing to admit? We elected him. We may re-elect him. We'll find out. I don't care what you say. Millions of people reflect the president. And so for me, one of the questions that I like to put out there is, so what are we doing in our own lives and in our own behavior to change that? A lot of people want me to respond to President Trump in Trump-like behavior. They stand up, and unless I stand up on my chair and curse and cuss and call him an idiot and a racist, they're not happy. And that's, not only is it not who I am, I don't think it's the example that you want from me, right? And so it is a big challenge to figure out what an appropriate response is. And then the other thing I'd say is, if not careful, that is all we would do, right? So if there's a tweet that needs response in my office, I stop what I'm doing, my staff stops what they're doing, and for 2 or 3 hours, the business stops. Well, so do you really want me to do that on every tweet? Or do you want me to go do bipartisan legislation, work on human trafficking, opioids, public lands issues? And the answer is obvious.
Sure.
But it doesn't feel obvious at the time that people are frustrated with the statement.
Buddy?
Sometimes I feel like we overemphasize that, and that sometimes it's we're a little bit too sensitive. Now, you may look at me and say, well, that's easy for you to say. You're a white male, been successful in business and blah, blah, blah. You haven't lived the way we've lived. Well, I would beg to differ with that. I was raised, as I said, I'm a child of the 70s, and I came through the segregation of our school system. I saw it firsthand. I saw what was happening back then. And yeah, it's easy to judge from the shoes that I'm walking in, but at the same time, there are times when I just want to say, let's just calm down and everybody just cool off for a minute and just think. As far as this president goes, I love his policy. I think he's spot on. And the procedure, I'm not always in favor of. I wouldn't do it that way personally, but that's the way it works for him. So, that's the way it is right now.
Let me ask you, one of the other areas that matters to a lot of Americans, both young and old, is healthcare. And I know that's another big area you've been working on, whether it's on opioids or drug prices, drug control, pre-existing conditions. But that whole package that we just call healthcare is something that a lot of Americans have tons of anxiety about. And I know you've been working on drug pricing, but what's the pathway there? And as you look at opportunities for working across the aisle, what are they?
Well, first of all, currently I'm the only pharmacist serving in Congress. And because of that, I've taken a keen interest, if you will, in
people
prescription
come for
drug
you for-
pricing, and they do all the
They
time.
come to
You
you
know,
for prescriptions?
not for prescriptions. I've retired from that part of it,
Okay.
but nevertheless, they do come from me for advice in
Right.
Congress, and that's the thing that you have to keep in mind. You know, we're a citizen legislature. John, what did you do before you became a member? You were
I built shooting ranges for a living.
built shooting ranges. Yeah. So you know, we've got an auctioneer from Missouri. We've got
8 former ministers.
yeah, we've got 8 ministers. We've got way too many lawyers. We've got, you know, we've got almond grove farmers. We've got all kind of
And
things
one
in Congress.
pharmacist.
And one pharmacist. And healthcare is extremely important. What's it going to take to decrease healthcare costs, to make sure that we have accessibility to healthcare? I'm convinced it's going to take free market principles. We've got to have competition within healthcare. That's what's going to drive healthcare costs down. John and I both are married to physical therapists.
Not
we
the
both.
same one.
Not the, no. But he is from Utah. But I'm sorry. I could not resist that.
That works the other way.
Diet Coke, please.
Anyway,
Where were we?
where were we? But that's what.
But I'm going to ask you. But you know, so you've been working on drug price transparency.
Yes.
Is that a real? I mean, I spoke to someone yesterday that I won't identify, but they're in the generics world, and they said, you know, there's some real fragile issues, and people are looking for a silver bullet. There's a giant ecosystem of problem out there, and people are looking at drug transparency as the fix. He says it's not going to fix it. So I'm just interested in whether or not Congress, and I don't mean this to demean members of Congress, but whether or not there is a search for the most efficacious in terms of what people think is happening, but the least efficacious in getting something actually done.
I think so. You know, we as a country have to make a decision. Is healthcare a right, or is healthcare, you know, something that you ought to have? And I think that that's a generational thing. I think that if I were to ask that question to most of you, you would say, yes, we should have health care. We should have quality health care. It should be provided by the government. Well, let me tell you, when you get, I'm completely and adamantly opposed to the government takeover of health care. And I will tell you that that's going to result in not only higher prices, but it's going to result in lower quality of health care. The best thing is going to be competition.
So I would say there's several paradigms that we need to change. One of them is that healthcare is healthcare. So for instance, there's a difference between somebody with a cancerous condition and no ability or resources to help with that, and somebody that wants acne medicine. And we tend to treat them like exactly the same, right? So that's one paradigm. Another paradigm is that we have no responsibility ourselves, and that's a huge problem, and no ownership in this ourselves. So how I take care of myself, whether I exercise, should all be factors, right, in part of the answer. And and another paradigm, the last one I'll just mention quickly, is that for too long we have looked at the healthcare system as fixing us when we're broken instead of keeping us from getting broken, right? So paying people to keep us healthy instead of paying people to fix us when we're unhealthy. And I think until we make some of these shifts,
Wasn't
we're going to
affordable
struggle.
care partly going towards a wellness paradigm?
Well, I think so, and I think that we're seeing people move towards that, but there's still far too many incentives financially to take care of sick people instead of keeping people from getting sick.
I want to go out to all of you and get maybe a lightning round of questions, lightning round of answers. But before I do that, John, you've got the lowest student debt rates in the nation. How does everyone else become like you? Is student debt an issue for any of you?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay,
So,
there you go. So there's a concern in the room.
Let me just tell you,
Move to Utah.
You need to move to Utah.
Yeah. Do you guys pay the student? You pay their loans? Yeah?
Probably the most fiscally conservative, personal responsibility state on the planet, right? Where we believe there's consequences and accountability. We have no debt, no long-term debt in our state. We're a balanced budget every year that gives us a tremendous foundation. And there's kind of a mindset that you don't go to school if you can't afford to pay for it. You work part-time jobs, so it's just a whole different mindset change, I think.
And one last thing to both of you real fast. A friend of mine, Steve Culbertson, is in the room, and he had something called Youth Services America. As I've looked at these divides across the country, and I never try to presume people's politics or where they're at or why they feel what they do, but you do feel, and if I go to Oklahoma, I go to Iowa, I go to around, you feel there's a division in certain places in the country, and I wonder what can bring us back together. You know, some people used to say Codels for Congress, and I'm wondering if some national service element makes sense for youth someday, that somehow bringing people in to contribute together across our lines is there. Do you guys support a national service program of any kind, Buddy?
I would absolutely support one. I think, the whole key is, and staff gets upset with me when I use this phrase, is that you got to have skin in the game. And so often I don't think that many of us, and especially when talking about healthcare, you got to have skin in the game. When you talk about being a citizen, you need to have skin in the game. You need to be involved. I think, it goes back to John F. Kennedy. We need to have the youth courts. We need to have people involved, and there's no question about it. I think it makes us all a better nation and makes us all better citizens.
John?
I mentioned I was just in Israel. They have a mandatory military service. We heard them talk about the reason their youth are so entrepreneurial, so independent, so well-adjusted is because of that mandatory service.
That's great. Well, thank you both. Let me take a few questions here real fast. Marissa's here with a mic, so we're going to just zap a couple, and we will do it here. Let's go with the gentleman here and then right behind.
This is for Congressman Carter. Your state's going to be one of the epicenters of 2020 with 2 open Senate races, numerous House races, and a competitive presidential race. Have you considered running for the now open seat for Georgia? For the
Georgia open seat. Okay, that's great. Right behind you.
Hi, my name is Seema Kazmi. I'm a pharmacist, and I want to talk about your point.
This is so cool.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about your point about value-based healthcare system, and if you guys are working on any federal legislation on that. And then to your point about competition in healthcare, a lot of pharmacies have been conglomerating. So what would you do to address that?
Great, thank you. And then right here, this front row, and then we'll go to the gentleman in the back.
Good evening, all. My name is Connor Clark. I'm at University of Maryland. Maybe my question is more slated towards your role on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but how can we make... Oh,
You asked about Bolton?
no, actually.
Thank you.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I already tweeted about it today. Yeah. I wanted to ask about how we can make responses to overwhelmingly likely interference in the 2020 election more bipartisan than last time. I don't think we really need to relitigate all the stuff between McConnell and then
Great.
President Obama, but it needs to do better.
Thank
How?
you. Thank you. And let's take this gentleman right here in the red tie in the back. He's being very polite. Great tie.
Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris. I go to AU. This is a question for Representative Buddy Carter. I just wanted to know, what are we going to do about the environment? Because right now you have a 0% approval rating from environmental groups. Also, Savannah, Georgia, is the biggest exporter of shark fins in the United States. Last year, we exported 18,000 shark fins, valued at about $800,000. This is having a tremendous effect on our ecosystems. What are we going to do?
Not sure China's
In 10
getting him
seconds,
anymore.
In 10 seconds.
Yeah, go ahead. You wanna
Okay,
start with
by
shark
the
fins?
way, for last year and this year, or last session and this session, I've been a co-sponsor to outlaw the shark fins and being shipped out of our ports. So just for the record, that is. And look, I'd be very careful about these scores that you hear about our voting records. You need to look at that in its totality. Oftentimes you'll have a group that will take 3 votes and say, oh, you were 0 for 3, therefore you get 0%. So, I think it's just erroneous to say that I don't care about our environment. I've made it perfectly clear. That's my home. It's where I've lived all my life and where I intend to live the rest of my life. I'm never going to do anything to hurt our environment, and it's very important to me.
Super. On the value-based healthcare system?
Yes, it's extremely important. I think that's the way that we have to do. I suspect you do MTMs, and that's very important, particularly for for other healthcare professions outside of just the doctor. You know, when in my generation, it was a doctor, then it was everybody else, and you know, everything gravitated toward it. Well, that has changed. Now, the ancillary services, if you will, the pharmacists, the LPNs, APRNs, and everything else that's out there, they're taking more responsibility now, and we've got to utilize that, particularly in our rural areas. That's the only way it's going to work, and it's the only way we're ever going to have healthcare costs to come down. But competition, transparency, I would disagree. I think transparency is essential. We've got to have transparency.
And do you want an office in the Hart Senate office building?
What am I supposed to say? No comment?
Oh.
You know, if the governor's got a tough decision to make, and I'm going to support him whatever decision he make. If you talk to anybody in the House who says that they don't want to be in the Senate, they're lying to you. Of course we want to be in the
Just
Senate.
the election
Yeah.
cycle alone. Yes.
But if asked, you'd serve.
Oh, absolutely.
There you go. There's a line. And let me ask you to take any of these, but also particularly the interference in our elections from not only Russia, but other state actors.
So I would just say the unfortunate thing about the Mueller report is that and you hear Mueller when he talks, he almost screams, Russia interfered with our elections, and it's as if nobody's hearing it. They all want to talk about the president's role. And the bottom line to the report is that Russia interfered with our elections, and we haven't taken that as a country or as a Congress serious enough. The other thing is you have to bifurcate the issues. So on one hand, you're talking about social media and influencing people's perceptions. Mm-hmm. The other is actually hacking into election systems. And too often we talk about those as if they're one problem. The interference with social media, get used to it, it's going to be part of your lives. You guys are going to have to figure out filters in your lives about who you can trust and who you can't trust. And until we do that, people are going to mess with our minds and our elections, and there's nothing we can do about it.
And finally, you've both been wonderful. Thank you for being so candid and spending time with us. But of the people who are your favorite Democratic candidates, who would you pick, buddy?
Probably
What's
Tulsi.
the standout one that you most respect? What did you say?
Tulsi,
Tulsi.
just because she works out with us in the gym, she's a great athlete. I'm not kidding you.
So you know, on Buddy's birthday, I should mention this. He's got a great tweet out there where he did 620 push-ups in how
In
much?
62 minutes on my
In
62nd
62 minutes,
birthday, yeah.
620 push-ups for your birthday present to yourself.
Yeah.
It's a bit ridiculous. I tried to do 50 coming over here and nearly died. But you did inspire me. So Tulsi, how about you, John?
Well, I just got to say, the reason he does that is to protect against the furniture disease. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's where your chest drops into your drawers. That's a dad joke.
Which Democrat do you
So
most
I
respect
would
at
say,
this
I'll
moment?
just say this. If Republicans had written a playbook to get President Trump back into the election, we couldn't written a better playbook than is unfolding before us right now because of the extreme nature of the candidates. Republicans are really independents are going to struggle, I think, with this group of candidates to find one that really represents their values.
Well, with that, we will leave it there. Ladies and gentlemen, Representative John Curtis and Buddy Carter, thank you both very much. Thank you. Great. Thank you, sir.